Our live shows are going to be thrilling, just tons of dead air.
Our live shows?
Yeah, all podcasts now do live shows eventually.
No, I think we'll be all right on the live shows. I actually think it'll be much more our personalities on the live show,
Yeah, probably.
the ribbing and stuff like that, which is where some of the community will actually fall in love with, right? Which is like,
Right.
man, Andrew's always right. Kevin thinks he's always right, but Andrew is actually always right.
Yep, that's absolutely how it will play out. I have no illusion otherwise. Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland, and across the Zoom from me is Andrew Greener. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. We're also here to get deeper on the human element. I could go on for an eternity about people and how they think about the process of building complex systems, and I can't think of two better people to do that.
If those two people exist, I haven't met them. On this week's show, we'll be talking about the role of the product owner, someone who is both the owner and not the owner of the product most of the time. It's very confusing, to be honest. But before we get to all of that, let's take a short break, and we'll be right back. This is a segment we like to call Personas, where we talk about the types of roles you'll encounter in the software development world and how those roles work best, and you can work with them more effectively. So, what role are we talking about today?
We're actually going to be discussing the challenges of being a product owner. But first of all, what is a product owner?
Product owner is a role that was originally defined as part of the Agile framework. So go listen to the episode about the Agile framework to hear our lovely thoughts about some of the good, bad, and ugly of that. But as a product owner, you are responsible for a ton of things. You are setting the vision in an Agile world of where you want this product to be. A lot of the times that overlaps with product managers, which is another product role, and why sometimes product owner and product manager can get very confusing. But you are participating at least in that vision setting. What do we want this product to be? What do we want these features to do for the business? You're also a champion for the persona that you're writing the software for. So you are responsible for advocating for your users and explaining to folks why the thing that we're building in this feature or this app or whatever it is important to the people who are using it. You need to be that usability champion advocating for your users and your personas. You're also participating in the prioritization. How do you know which thing to do first, second, and third? Hopefully you have some frameworks or ways to decide that prioritization, understanding the value you're going to get out of the feature and deciding which thing is more important. I don't know what the next topic would be. You are the shepherd, maybe, is the right way to say. You are responsible for helping that engineering team actually deliver on that. You're working with them daily on making sure they understand what you need to build and making sure that they are building it every single day and answering questions and helping them create the thing correctly. You're probably involved in QA, quality assurance, helping making sure that the thing that got developed by the engineering team is being delivered and successfully creating the vision and the thing that you want to create with that engineering team. And then a lot of the times you have to do coordination with a bunch of different teams. You're working with the folks on the business side, helping them understand what's going on, what's the progress, how are things going, when are you going to hit this date, and sort of that cross-team collaboration, making sure everyone stays aware of the progress on the features that you're building. It's a lot for a single person to do, and depending on the organization, you might only be doing 10% of that. A product owner sometimes is just the in-the-weeds person working every single day with the engineering team and helping them build the features. Sometimes you're everything. You don't have a product manager, you don't have anybody else, and you have to do all of it. It's a ton.
That was going to be my first question. Like, is the product owner, or has the product owner role become the death of the product manager role in a lot of companies?
In a lot of companies it has, I think, as we talked about sort of some of the failings of the Agile framework in the last episode. I think that is one of the pitfalls, is a lot of the times teams look at the product owner and they expect them to somehow have enough time to go and talk to users, talk to customers, talk to prospects, understand the problems and the things you want to build, lay out the vision of what that thing is that you want to build. You are then supposed to prioritize that on a roadmap. You're then supposed to prioritize that on the engineering's task list. This is Kevin from the future, just chiming in. I don't know why I couldn't think of the word backlog on the day we recorded this, but I meant the engineering backlog. Who knows? Anyway, back to the episode. You're then supposed to make sure the engineering team develops all of that. And a lot of those things, one, not everybody has that skill set. There's reasons that people specialize in being a product manager, being that person who can go and understand the requirements, understand the problem space, go talk to those clients, and spend all of their time hearing about what you could be solving for people and letting the product owner really focus on the execution. How do we get that out the door with the engineering team? And so, yes, I think a lot of companies end up merging that role. And I think that's probably unfair to expect a single individual to do that. Maybe if you're, and I don't, there's no humble way to say if you're a person like me, but like in a startup, if you have a person like me who can do that at, I do each of those things 80% well, but I don't do them in a startup very well because I'm doing all of those things. And so sure, if there's 4 of you in a garage trying to put something together, sure, being the product owner who has to do all of those things, maybe it makes sense. I own a third of that company. I'm willing to put in the 70 hours a week that it takes to do that. I would not expect that of the average person who's going to be in this role in a normal sized company.
So let me get this straight when we're talking about the product owner, and this is for our non-technical folk and some technical folk who maybe don't appreciate the product role and haven't analyzed it the same way we have over our careers. But in the old days, I would have imagined that a good product manager would be working with me both internally and also they would be working externally. So they'd have a real customer focus. They'd be building requirements, understanding the customer's problem, and then they'd also be able to turn around and have a good conversation with a technical leader to talk about how something should work. And maybe it didn't go into as much detail as it needed to, and it wasn't daily, and maybe the technical teams took a little bit more, they had a little bit more freedom for expression of what they were hearing from product managers. The product owner role sort of was the division of that, so the product manager could really focus externally and allow the product owner to focus internally and really speak technically and be there and every single day be available to look at to make sure requirements were being met. Demos would show the product owner how close to the requirements that the development teams were, collaborating and just generally, being a champion for that team. So then when you take a product owner and ask them to do product management functions, is that not like a throwback to the old world? Except we've just burdened them with things that we didn't burden the old product manager with. So is that true? And then do you have any examples of how dangerous that is or where it's been dangerous in your career?
Well, yeah, and I think that's the thing that's sort of, again, to harp on the Agile framework and ask for clarification and make it better, is that's the weird thing about Agile is technically product managers aren't in there. You're asking the product owner to be that product manager. And so that's where it's this, like you're saying, it's this weird thing where we went from having the product manager role and then asking the product owner to do all of that. And I think that's why Agile is very rarely actually implemented correctly, because we recognized you still need a product manager. You still need that person to be externally facing. And I think when you look at the complexity of just going and getting customer feedback, you need to go and attend sales calls so you can be hearing prospects. You need to go and schedule calls and conversations with existing customers that you already have. You're doing user feedback sessions. Another reason why you should include UX, user experience design in your teams, because they can help with those user feedback sessions. But I could list all of these things that a product owner needs to do, and we haven't even talked about all of the other things that they need to do in those daily conversations with their engineering teams, making sure that the implementation of these ideas into features is still on track and is still being designed the right way. And so I think if you just look at hours in a day and hours in a week, how is somebody supposed to prioritize, okay, well, I've got this thing that I need to go and talk with the engineers about. Oh, actually, the prospect can't meet with us on Tuesday. We're going to meet with them on Thursday. So now your calendar is constantly shifting. You're trying to find times when you can meet with clients. It's too much. There's no way a person reasonably can be expected to do all of those things.
So why is that occurring? Is that companies misunderstanding the role? Is it organic, or is it just happening? Because Agile can be like that, right? Where everybody's just going along and all of a sudden it's, hey, there's a gap here. Feels like it's a product decision. Let's just put it on with the product owner. Like, what's led to that product owner sort of shifting back to the product management position as well?
I think part of it is probably just executives not understanding the difference and being like, oh, well, I need a product person and we're now Agile, so I'm going to have the product owner. And they don't think through the implication and the ramification of that. And they're trying to cut their budgets and not have to have 5 people involved when they could have 3 people involved. And so they don't think about the impact of, well, okay, great, but now this person is going to do 50% of 2 different jobs. They're therefore going to do an F minus grade on both jobs. And so I think part of that is just not having a proper understanding and high level decision making about building teams and understanding what goes into all of that. And I think you need to have people who know how to build a product organization, and that is not always a skill set that you have in the company. Or you have an engineering team trying to build a product organization because they need it to support their teams. And again, that's not a dig on those engineering teams. They don't have that experience to know what to do and to how to build these teams. And probably part of this answer is just budget cutting, is just let's find one person who can do 3 jobs. Cool. Great.
One of the other areas that I want to focus on for a few minutes is the technical product owner. Can you tell us what a technical product owner is in your words? And then we can get into some of my observations of maybe the lack of funding around that area. But what is a technical product owner?
A technical product owner is someone who does not fit into any of the current frameworks that we have, because a good technical product owner understands enough about the engineering process, the current engineering infrastructure, your platform, how it works, where databases live, where services and APIs are. They understand why certain things function the way that they do. And if you're in a pure agile world, that is a thing that engineers are supposed to do, and they are supposed to hear only about the problems. The product owner is supposed to only tell you users wish that they could get access to their data in a timely fashion. And the engineers say, well, we could do a spreadsheet download feature. We could do an API to give them access. The engineers are supposed to figure out the different technical ways that you would actually accomplish the goal that the product owner has set. And the reason that you want a technical product owner or technical product manager, depending on a couple of distinctions we don't have time to get into, this world of product XYZ job titles gets messy really quickly, is because you want somebody who can understand the infrastructure and the technical reason. I'm going to find another word for technical. The engineering style reasons why certain things work the way that they do. And when they're talking with customers, when they're talking with their product manager, when they're talking with the business and the stakeholders, they can help explain. I can tell you right away, if we want to go down the road of being able to offer the download version of this feature, it's just going to be a bigger problem. We don't have any of the queuing necessary. We don't have any of the infrastructure ready to do an asynchronous backend job. Like, they immediately can tell you the trade-offs and make smarter decisions up front and get people on board with ideas earlier, rather than 2 weeks later you finally got the feedback from the engineering team why an idea wasn't going to work very well. You can get that feedback into the cycle earlier. You also get a better partnership with the engineering teams. So when that person is talking to about the value that you can get out of the ideas, they can understand when an engineer proposes, well, we could do it as a download, and they start talking about all of the services and backend processes that need to go to offer a download of a file to the user. If you're a technical product owner and you understand all of the stuff that they're talking about, you're quickly noticing this is longer than a sprint. This is going to be a thing that is going to take a little bit longer. Wait a second, what happens if the download fails? How do we tell the user about that? I need to have a notification system built into this. When you understand all of the technical underpinnings of what's being proposed, you just I don't know what the right metaphor is here. You skip steps and just immediately land on some conclusions in partnership with your engineering teams, and now your features are better, faster. You might have gotten to the same conclusion with just a normal product owner, but it probably took you a little bit longer as you had to iterate through all of those different variations of how you were going to get to the value.
I love that answer, and it's a little bit of a trick in a way, because I know exactly what they are, and I'm curious. For me, I think I would say that when I look at the missing roles in a company that are most damaging, this role is probably one that has the least amount of focus and attention at big companies, and is one of the most damaging misses for a large company. I'd say I've seen more organizational shifts, gap filling, compound issues, anti-patterns, finger pointing, just fights across organizations because of the lack of a technical product owner or technical product manager. I think technology roadmaps are quite often left to fester, and they feel like you're jamming them into the customer-centric roadmap. There's no commitment. It is left up to engineering teams that are already over-resourced or over-allocated inside of the roadmap. And I'd love to, at a later date, get into that technical product owner / manager lack of as a separate conversation, because I think, for me, I don't understand why. But let me ask it this way. I've always assumed it was less interesting for product guys to be focused on Oracle databases and Postgres and real-time streaming streaming pipelines than it is to think about the human nature and customers and what makes them exciting and I'm close to the revenue. Is it really as simple as that, the lack of interest from the product side in that? Or is it much bigger than that?
I mean, it is probably a self selecting problem in which, if you're someone like me who is a complete geek and loves the process of software engineering, but writes, B plus code at best, then finding the opportunity for a role where I get to still have my foot in that engineering world and scratch that itch without being on the hook for writing good code. But I also enjoy talking to people and thinking through problems and solving, the brainstorming session is really fun with really smart people. And so if you don't have those opportunities, if that role doesn't exist, then you have engineers who don't realize that they could be going and getting into the product world. And you have product people who might not realize that they could go, like, it's a self-selecting problem of if you don't provide opportunities to people, then they don't know that that's a role that they could fill. I also think it's really hard sometimes. Like, that's a balancing act of a skill set that you don't necessarily find in a lot of people. I think of all of the possible roles, the percentage of the population who want to do that is probably naturally just lower. But also, that's probably a self-selecting problem because of systemic issues why certain people don't get into industries and a bunch of things that we aren't going to solve. But I do think that there's the reason Agile took off is because there was enough engineers who wanted to get closer to the problem and understanding why we're doing things and why is this the right thing to solve for. And you, as a product owner, need to balance that. You need to keep constantly in your mind the why, not just the how. And so I think you probably could find more people who wanted to do that role if the opportunity was there, but businesses for some reason don't think that they can do that. And I think Agile is a little bit to blame, actually. I think Agile says that's the engineer's job. And so engineers are the ones who are expected to get technical and worry about the Oracle database versus the whatever. But I always come back to, there's only so many hours in the day. Don't you want help? Don't you want someone whose job it is to spend 100% of their time figuring that out so you can go do 100% of your time on the stuff you really enjoy doing?
Let me ask you this. Is a technical or solution architect to an enterprise architect the same as what a technical product owner slash manager is to a business architect? Can I relate the two in that way? Thinking that the enterprise architect is at a strategic vision, maybe half strategic, half technology. Let's break it down that way. And then the solution architect is less strategic, more technology. And then the technical architect is very little strategy, much more tactical, much more technical. Is that what a technical product owner slash manager is to the business architect?
If you have a business architect, I think this is the problem with these. It's very clear what a software engineer is, right? They write code. You know the types of code they might need to write, but this industry hasn't actually identified what these roles are. And so sometimes a business analyst is a product manager, but a product manager sometimes is much more internal facing than external facing. Like, you go down all of these roads where none of these job titles line up. And so it's constant shades of gray of figuring out. I think a technical product manager is the person who, in my mind, would be the middle of the road. They'd be the person who needs to understand enough of the value in the business and the strategy, but they then need to translate that into all of the technical world, where I would then expect an engineering team to actually help kick it over the finish line. Kick it over the finish line. That's not a sports metaphor at all. That's nothing. But you need to be able to, like, it's all because I don't think anyone actually understands product well enough. And so this industry is constantly trying to figure it out. And so everyone's inventing new job titles and new things for people to do. And it makes hiring, by the way, really hard because someone had the job title product owner. That doesn't mean anything. You got to read through every single bullet point and figure out what they actually did in that job to figure out what they're going to do. But yeah, I think it should have tiers. You should be able to say, well, the product manager is the one who's entirely external facing, simply identifying all of the problems we could solve and helping you build the case why that's valuable to both the client and to the business as a thing we should solve. And then you hand it off to the technical PM, and then you hand it off to the product owner. But all of those people need to be collaborating. Like, it's not easy. Anyway, I could go on and on and on.
Yeah, I like that you describe it that way. It's actually my terrible analogy of the day. It's like time traveling and the electrician going back to 1600s and getting there and saying, well, I know how to wire something, but I don't know how to generate electricity, right? Like,
Right.
You brought me into this environment, but I'm an electrician. Like, I can't do anything in this time period. And I often think about that, and I'm glad you brought it up, that you're interviewing into a company and you're thinking, well, I know what my role is. I'm very good at this role, but it somewhat matters where you land, right? Once you get in there, you realize, well,
Right.
There's no business architect. And I'll pay you some respect here that if I was to tell you what I think you are, to me, you're a business architect,
Sure.
which is to say, I want more of you at the enterprise, and then I want more technical product owners and just straight product owners reporting into somebody like yourself, because you do have that very strong technical background. And you could argue, well, my technology has limitations. I write B plus code, but that's okay because the interface between you and the enterprise architects is as siblings, right? Your peers,
Right.
you work very closely. So as long as I can translate what you're asking, then I can take that to the next level with the engineering team. So I do think what you pointed out again is that lack of a plan, the environment being so important. So then how do you deal with that then? The responsibilities of that role. What do you do? Like, how do you fix that? How do you save them before they drown? How do you balance all those responsibilities of the role in those environments?
I mean, the incorrect but slightly correct answer is you got to get comfortable saying no to people. I genuinely do think too many people are people pleasers, and they think that any form of pushing back and saying no, or that's going to take me longer and I'm going to have it for you in 2 weeks, any of that kind of stuff feels awkward for people. And I think a product owner really has to get good at saying, great idea, we're currently in the middle of doing this other one, I will take that on in a week. Great idea, that sounds like product marketing. Great idea, that sounds like product management. It depends on who you have that you can rely on, but you should find people on your team. It should be a collaboration. It should be everyone doing what they can. And I think a lot of the times people just are like, well, that sounds like it's in my realm, so sure, I'll help you out and do that. Well, you're not protecting yourself because you're now taking on 80 hours a week worth of work. You've got to find the ways to actually say, I can do that for you after the current sprint is done. I will research that with the product marketing team. You got to find ways to not take on all of it all at once. I'd also say, hopefully, you're a little bit of a process nerd because you got to put the things in, you got to get really good at, this is where I take my notes. This is where I refer back to things. This is where I have my little checklist of to-dos, because you do have a ton on your plate. And if you're not on top of, you owe this to the engineering team before the next sprint planning meeting. You've got to make sure that the QA for the current feature is done before we need to, like, all of those things you need to stay on top of. And I think that's a skill set that you need to develop.
So that's interesting. But in environments like that, where you have somebody who's willing to wear those many hats and get things done, sometimes they're crossing lines, right? They're breaking into other people's disciplines. They're trying to fill gaps where those disciplines are failing because they don't know they're supposed to be part of this stage of the process. So how do you avoid the turf wars then? Because inevitably those turf wars exist. The most famous turf war, not necessarily even a turf war, but the battle between product and engineering is strong, right? Since Agile and some of the anti-patterns that come from Agile, we've seen the product engineering battle become strong. But how do you avoid those turf wars? Like, what are some of the things you should be working towards to fix that?
So I think the first thing I would say is you should be working with whoever your leadership is to clarify those roles. Don't let it be confusing in the session whether or not that is something that is on engineering's plate, your plate, product marketing's plate, whoever it is. Get some clarity. I think the number one product skill anyone should be willing to have is you need to be comfortable looking dumb. You need to be comfortable being the person on the call who says, wait, I don't understand why we're doing it this way. And that applies to both your users and your clients. Asking a prospect, why are you doing this a certain way, is scary, because now the prospect's going to be like, well, this guy doesn't understand my process. No, you're trying to learn their process. Same thing with your own company. Asking your boss, why does engineering think that this is on their plate? That's not how Agile works. That's not how our version of Agile works. Shouldn't that be something that's on QA's plate? Shouldn't that be something that's on the product manager's plate? Shouldn't that be something that's on my plate? All of these things you should go and ask for clarity on and force the conversation, as awkward as that might be in some cases, and get everyone to agree, where is the turf? Whose turf is what? That's not going to work in all cases. People are people. You're either not going to be successful in that conversation, or people are going to still want to do their own thing. And so I would say the next skill set that you should have is being able to identify people's incentives. So why is the engineer trying to take that over? What about it do they want to do? And so if you can go and say, okay, well, it's because the last time they were involved in this massive database migration project, it completely fell apart because the person didn't remember to do X, Y, and Z. So now that you know what their incentive is, they're trying to prevent a disaster that they were forced to clean up the last time, you can go and talk to them about it and say, hey, I recognize we want to do this. I'm going to work with you to document all of the things, and we're going to make sure that that doesn't happen again. You've got the salesperson who maybe wants to be able to say yes to every single client and close the deals and make their commission. So you need to find those incentives and understand how are you going to be able to meet those people's sort of personal needs and still get what you need done accomplished. That's easier said than done, by the way. I've been in weird situations. The company we were both at a couple of years ago that got acquired, I got pulled in and was told, you need to go and cannibalize 5 of our past acquisitions and merge them all into one platform. And I spent like 3 months going around and telling people, hi, I'm here to kill your business and merge it with mine. Those conversations sucked. And so I had to figure out like, okay, well, the French company was never able to actually do real-time execution. So I was able to convince them, let's go look at all of your win-loss analysis and realize if you merge with us, then now all of your real-time execution is taken care of. That's $10 million of revenue that you weren't able to close that now you'll be able to close. This other company was able to do a bunch of database processing stuff that we couldn't do, but we could do all of the channel execution. So I was able to show them the reason why you didn't hit your revenue number last quarter is because you couldn't execute on these SMS campaigns. Look at this. You'll now be able to do that. So you find those incentives and get them on board with what your plans are because you're still checking their box, even though they might not be the one who actually get to do it themselves.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think that that's where you point out, and we can get into this in a future episode. But for me, that's the distinction between the business architect and a very good technical product owner / manager, right? Somebody like yourself at the level you can be tactical and inside of a project, but then you can also raise and lift to the level of strategic, where you're like, hey, we've looked at the data, and here's why this area of the business is failing, and oh, and by the way, if we build this correctly, every single area of the business can utilize this, and there's business use cases across the business for something like this. So it'll be interesting to get into that because I think, again, I always joke whenever I'm asked to build an enterprise architecture organization, I always joke that the one thing you don't get from those disciplines is a business architect. And I actually feel fortunate for having worked with you at several companies now is, yeah, he's a business architect. And my worry is that the longer nobody ever calls you a business architect, it never becomes true, right? Like you're this.
To be fair, that's because the salary range of a business architect is not in the right thing for me. So
Well, again, that's probably a lack of respect on that role over time, right? Where it's,
sure.
Maybe there needs to be a shifting in thinking of that. But I love it because it makes my job a lot easier when I can get onto a call with people like yourself who can talk technology, can look at can look at the business and technology tactically and strategically. It makes my life a lot easier. It feels like you're higher upstream. Like if I'm not there to say, hey, company, what are you doing? Like, why are we doing this? Like, this is just a bad move. Then I know I can rely on someone like yourself to be scratching their head at the same time and say, okay, I might be more okay with it than the grouchy enterprise architect, but I still have questions that they're going to want to know later, right? So it's an interesting.
I think that's sort of the thing I would come back to. Maybe that's my number 0, my number 1 true actual thing, which is collaboration is such like a dumb buzzword, paradigm, whatever. But collaboration genuinely is finding the team members who you can trust and rely on to help you get to whatever answer you need. And so I know on our calls, you're going to be able to figure out whether or not that cloud-based database cluster can blah, blah, blah. I don't need to worry about that. I've got you on that call. If I'm a person who's trying to figure out these problems that I'm facing as a product owner, find your allies, find the product manager who you can work with, who can help answer that question for you, and find the incentive for the engineering manager who doesn't want to let go. Find those people who you can work with, and it doesn't have to all be on your shoulders. You should hopefully be surrounding yourself with team members who all want to share the burden of getting to whatever final thing you need to get to. And that shared responsibility might not even be built into the organization structure, but you should go and find them and reinforce each other however you can.
Yeah, it's actually interesting you bring it up that way. I think we share a philosophy. I've always thought of those relationships as being like the Venn diagram, right? Like,
right.
Here's the problem, and here's the domain and the problem, and then here are the people, here are all the relationships I've made, and here's their skill sets, right? So it's not just the who, it's the how do they think, right? Like, hey, I want to present this to an organization. Do I have a Kevin Newland who can go and be funny and witty and charming and present something to a large organization, which is not something I might give to an Amanda, but then I send Amanda somewhere because it's much more analytical and brings something to the team that Kevin might not have. So I love that you bring it up that way. But how do you all then collaboratively stay on top of like this ever changing and evolving landscape? especially now, it's so fast. We got paradigm shifts like data mesh. We've got cloud technology came along. We got big sort of data initiatives that sort of bypass governance and compliance worries and thinking to say, let's share data in a new way. How do you maintain velocity in that evolving landscape?
You work with Andrew Greener, who won't stop sending you articles to read, and you just have to read whatever he sends you. I think that might be the first answer. No, I mean, genuinely, it is. I think that's exactly what we're saying about like finding the people who bring different things together. I genuinely wouldn't learn about a bunch of stuff if you weren't so passionate about it. And so finding those people who are interested in other aspects that you're not interested in and asking them questions. What's going on? What should I be reading? What should I be learning about? Find your, I don't know what the right word is, network people, and find other people who are interested in stuff that you want to learn about and ask them where you should start. What should you go and understand? I also just think a general sort of, I struggle a lot with, I am very curious about a lot of things, but I also have plenty of work during the day, in which case I'm doing my actual job, not going and reading articles and learning about other things. And then when I'm done with work for the day, I'm curious about a bunch of other stuff that has nothing to do with work. And that's the stuff I'm reading about and learning about outside of work hours. And so I think the other thing that you need to sort of convince yourself of, and I still struggle with this today, is part of your job is learning. If you're a good product person, you're constantly learning and keeping up with things. And so don't think of it as, oh, I'm going to find an article that I need to read at 6 p.m. Think of it as, oh, I need to find an article and I'm going to put on my calendar every Tuesday, an hour or two blocked out for me to go and read about things. And consider that learning should be part of your job and not like an extracurricular that you need to do to keep up with your job.
Yeah, that's interesting. I shouldn't describe it as thinking back to the good old days, but I think back to the beginning of my career on that first night on third shift operations job, and I said, okay, cool. What do I need to learn? And you know, that first couple of years rolled out, and I thought to myself, well, I'm going to get by on a language, and obviously concepts, but I'm going to get by on a back-end language. I'm going to get by on some user interface, not great design, but at least HTML, style sheets, JavaScript.
Sure.
And I'm going to need some database knowledge, right? And I thought that was going to carry me. I thought that was going to be enough, and there'd be some variations and some paradigm shifts along the way. But when I think today, and you talk about that opportunity and the time you're at work and then the time you're learning outside of work, did you expect, or did any of us really expect that it would balloon into what it is today? So if I think about those initial 3, 4, 5 concepts and technologies that I knew, today there's almost been an explosion, and
there's so many.
There's
you need
so
to be on
many.
top of so much.
Has the number of resources, again, there's organizational questions, right? Like, have we grown the organizations big enough to cater for that? Or are people like you and I eventually going to hit critical mass where it's like, there is no more time in the day. There is no more time for me to learn and keep up. Because when you're in the enterprise too, you're not always leaving the old behind, right? You're quite often building on the old as a foundation, or the legacy as a foundation, and saying, we're going to put all these new concepts over the legacy, and we're going to find a cool way to tie the two together. But our customers are going to have this new slick experience. So what are your thoughts on the future? Is it going to keep climbing? Are we going to know double what we need to know in another 10, 15 years? Is it going to slow down? Have we peaked?
There's what I wish would happen, which is the money would come back down to the employees rather than being stuck in the hands of a bunch of billionaires. And you could actually pay people living wages and pay enough people to do all of the work that you actually need to accomplish. In which case, yeah, I think I understand why people, especially when you talk about agile, they're like, well, we could have a team of just like 7 people go and do this amazing stuff. And it's like, sure, but their life kind of sucks probably. You actually should have a team of 10 people doing that. And it's okay that you actually have specialities where the product manager goes and does this, the product owner goes and does this, the engineering people, that's okay. That's good. Let people have the time to go and do that. And then it's okay that your enterprise architect is one of the 3 people who actually understands all of the craziness, along with a bunch of your lead engineers, how certain things work. And the enterprise architect doesn't need to know one of the weird things that the product manager knows. And the product manager doesn't need to know 3 of the weird things that the product owner knows. That's all okay. I don't think the world's going that way. I think the world is going in the other direction. And I think what ends up happening is, whether it's AI or machine learning or whatever, you're going to get to the point that you're paying Amazon or Google to run a cloud service for you, and you no longer actually understand what that service is doing. It just simply gives you the output you expect. And so as we shift more and more to the cloud, you now actually know less and less. You are simply told by your AWS rep, well, pay us $10,000 a month, and the AWS blah blah machine will go and do that for you. And you just simply get the result. And you're now in less and less just charge of your own software, you're just taking advantage of that. And maybe that's good, but it's kind of scary.
Is it bad that I got visions of John Hurt in 1984 sitting at his little teleprompter machine, getting numbers and dates and just not really ever questioning what those little excerpts are? He's just like pasting them into literature from the past and changing history. You know me, I'm all about evolution and being part of the matrix, but that's a pretty dystopian future for technology, right?
I mean, that's the reason I've always had a problem with the concept of open source technology. Not because the ideas are bad, but because people need to get paid, and you need to therefore pay for software, or something needs to happen somewhere. But all that being said, open source has a point, which is I'm not dependent on Jeff Bezos deciding what the AWS cloud machine tells me is the answer to a thing. Open source means I can go and verify how the code that runs that works, and I can make sure you're not secretly starting to tell me the answer that you as Amazon want the answer to be. So is that slightly too dystopian? Sure. But also, if Amazon is now providing the credit card transaction service that everyone starts to use, and the only option they offer in the API is to give a 5% tip, there's no other choices because Amazon is in the business of the gig economy, keeping people at a certain wage level, then I no longer have the ability to control that. And as a consumer, I'm now living in an even more dystopian world because my technology is controlled by 3 billionaires. So I I worry about it. I get why it's happening, but yikes.
Here's my sort of enterprise architecture head kicking back into the thing that scares me the most, going back to my question of me knowing 3 to 5 technologies in the beginning to today, is and also related to the lack of technical product ownership, is that we're sort of asking the engineers to stop coding solutions, right? We're saying that the scaling is no longer in finding a fancy way to build Columnar before it exists, as you did with some mutual friends, and it's not writing better, faster, or working in closer to the metal code frameworks as C++, right? It's actually now we'll scale in the infrastructure, right? We'll scale and we'll use multiple databases now. Now I can have a search engine database, and I'm going to store my tables in Iceberg, but then they're going to move over to Snowflake, and I'm going to have all these different databases in there. But there's really no technical product roadmap ownership on that. Hopefully, I think maybe this is why we're seeing a resurgence of the enterprise architecture role, is that there's so much technology in the stack these days that you need that person to come in and figure out, like, here's how we're going to use the 5 databases that we're using, right? But it is a scary thought to think about, cool, these stacks are now made up of 16 to 25 different technologies because we picked an open source database for that one very specific thing that it does really well. Whereas in the old days, we sort of looked at a technology and said, okay, it only does 75% of the things that we care about. We'll take a hit on these 25% of the features and functionality. But now we're getting very specialized in saying we need a whole database just for that 10% of what we want to do with our data. And I don't know how sustainable that is without some drastic measures that you're pointing out, which is more money leaving the hands at the top to build organizations that can specialize in that architecture. And I can tell you that some companies are really investing in enterprise architecture for that reason and have been given the rein and the dollars. And then some are still limping along, testing the water to see how it kicks on. And then some won't ever really invest in that because they don't necessarily understand the challenge of building truly enterprise architecture, right?
Yeah, no, I don't. I think that's one of the biggest challenges with any role in software today, but especially the product owners and especially the technical data product owners, whatever adjective or noun you want to stick in front of product owner these days. That person has to somehow navigate all of that. And it's a lot to expect individuals to keep in their heads if you aren't going to build up entire teams of expertise. All right, well, I hope for any of the product owners out there listening or people who want to get into that world, we haven't entirely scared you off. I think there are really fun aspects of this if you can find the organization that is going to support you in doing it. And if not, I will always tell people, advocate for yourself. Speak up and tell leadership why they're not doing it the right way and that your role could be better if they just let it be. All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. If you liked what you heard, maybe go and drop 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leave us a nice review. And if you didn't like what you heard, remember the name of the podcast is Jordan Jesse Go. Also, tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there grow by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it. And a friendly reminder that we're always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with an engineering or product team member, trying to figure out how to solve an agile process problem, or you just can't understand why your favorite app just updated everything and it's now terrible, we're here to talk it through with you. You can send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com, and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up being a coworker or something. To read articles that we've written on similar topics to the ones we talk about here, head over to the blog at acceptancepod.com. You can also follow us on most apps. We're at acceptancepod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog there. For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at ktomasuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER. And this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.